Chapter 33, page 251. Early in the afternoon, Mr. Caloris's friend drove me in his wagon down the dirt path that led to the harbor, the same path that had led me to Spears Caloris the night before. When we reached the harbor, I followed him along a wood walkway past a line of deserted slips. My experience with boats being limited to drawings I had seen in books, I assumed that they all had towering masts, billowing sails, and a battalion of oars poised evenly over the surface of an inky sea. Therefore, if I had seen a Roman slave ship or a Spanish galleon at the end of the walkway, I would not have been surprised. What I saw, however, was an ungainly-looking vessel with a squat metal hull and a phalanx of machinery. No oars, no sails, no mast, just 150 feet of metal swaying sluggishly against an unseen anchor. We ascended a wood plank and stepped into a green metal deck. I felt then as though I had stepped into another world, an alien and self-contained world with its own language, laws, and rules of behavior. A handful of sullen-looking men stood by the rails, some glancing over their shoulders at us as though we were two empty bottles that had just been tossed onto their deck. In a world where every man, every piece of metal, and every block of wood had a function, our presence was at best superfluous and at worst an insult. Mr. Caloris's friend led me down a steep metal stairway, down an airless corridor to a small empty room. Actually, it was more like a container, a windowless, green-walled container designed either for the storage of unusable ship parts or the transport of heart-sick refugees. There was no bed, no chairs, no sink, and very little air. What air there was oppressive and sour-smelling and crowded with the presence of past sufferers. "This is where you will stay," he said. "You don't leave this room, all right?" "All right," I said. "Give me your 8 lira." I handed him the 10 lira note, and he gave me 2 coins. "I'll be back," he said, closing the door behind him. I was too excited to sit quietly, so I walked around the little room. I was tempted to go on deck, but I did not want to risk being thrown off the ship for insubordination, so I sat against one of the walls and waited. I knew that I was probably free, but I wouldn't let myself believe it. As far as I was concerned, I still lived in a world where Mr. Caloris's friend was a fraud who took money from Armenian boys and then had them arrested by the gendarmes. In my mind, there would be no freedom until I reached Constantinople. An hour later, Mr. Caloris's friend returned with a boy about my age. He had a sallow, friendly face and black, dirt-streaked hair. The jacket he wore was too big for him, and his trousers were faded, dirt-smeared, and mud-caked. Mr. Caloris's friend took the boy's money and told him not to leave the room. He disappeared for a moment and returned with a jar of water, a lamp, and a matchbox, and a bag filled with bread. "You will be in Constantinople in 4 days," he said. "Good luck." The boy's name was Gagik. He came from Samson, and like me, he had never been on a boat before. He seemed reluctant to talk at first, and I guessed he was shy, though, of course, it was hard to draw my definitive conclusions about the native personality of one who's lost his home and his family. I asked him how he knew Mr. Caloris's friend, and he said he had met him at the harbor. "Did you trust him?" I asked. "I had to," he said. Just then the ship's horn sounded. Above us we heard footsteps going up and down the metal stairs. The engines vibrated the walls of our small room, and my heart began to beat a little faster. And then I felt the boat begin to move, and I knew, as I had not known before, that I was really leaving, that this ship was taking me away from the shore of my country, the shore of my home, the shore of the boy I had been, and the life and the people I had loved. And as the boat drew itself further out to sea, I longed for that life as I had not longed for it before. I longed for my mother's face and voice, and my heart was a scream for my mother, sounding over the face of the land I was leaving, for the brown hair she had had, for her bones and her rags. For the first few hours of the voyage, I slept a black sleep. I awoke to find Gagik sleeping a few feet from me. I sat up with the lamp, listened to the steady hum of the engines, and felt the long minutes pass. When Gagik awoke, he picked up a bag of the bread, opened it, looked inside, and then put it down. "What time do you think it is?" he said. I shook my head. It didn't matter what time it was. Our 24-hour day of sunlight and darkness had been replaced by the 96-hour span of sea that separated us from Constantinople, a nauseating eternity of bread and water, lamplight, and rolling waves. "I wish it was tomorrow," Gagik said. I nodded listlessly. I was beginning to feel sick in a way I'd never felt sick before, remembering that I had not eaten all day. I reached for the bag of bread, but just the thought of eating made me queasy, so I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, feeling the rigid bulk of the ship rise and fall as it inched its way along the surface of the water. I turned on my side so that I faced the wall and drew my legs up to my chest. I swallowed, and my tongue felt fat in my mouth, as though it were someone else's tongue. Thinking I needed air, I got to my feet and threw open the door, but the corridor was as humid and airless as this room. When I sat down, the ship rocked and the door slammed shut, and I lay down on the floor and began to rock back and forth, moaning softly, keeping perfect time with the rolling of the ship with the waves. Around this time, I realized I had been listening to a second set of moans similar to my own, but in a slightly different key. I turned and looked, and Gagic, who had slumped a little down the wall, his face pale and moist in the light. "What's wrong?" I said. He shook his head. He started to speak and threw up on his pants. For 3 days, we were too seasick to eat or drink. The bag of bread lay in a corner where I had thrown it the second night. The jar of water was used as a doorstop, and every day someone would kick the door open and close the door. "It stinks in there," a voice would say, or nothing was said at all. When we could talk, we talked about Constantinople, about palaces and bazaars and endless streets of endless possibilities. Gagic had heard that every day was market day and that all the lights on the streets turned night into day. I said I had heard that every fountain was filled with golden coins, though in fact I had heard no such thing. Our misery worked upon the city like a magician, transforming glass into crystal, brick into gold, the earthly into the ethereal. And the more miserable we were, the more wondrous and fantastical Constantinople became, until finally it seemed more a creation of a genie than of architects and stone cutters. Worse than the seasickness was the time I spent with my own thoughts. Sometimes it was Dyron who stepped forward, sometimes Sisak and Arminohi, but most often and most painfully it was Oskina, reading me stories when I was sick, changing my wet sheets late at night when I was 4 years old, chasing me through the house when I accidentally broke her bracelet, smiling beside me in a photograph. I embraced her by the river, and I said goodbye 100 times, knowing I had had no other choice, yet telling myself I should have stayed behind. In my mind, I told her that I loved her and missed her, and in my mind she forgave me as she sat beside my mother in the darkness and watched the second me crawl faster and faster to the river. I had lost all track of time when the ship's horn finally sounded. Oskina smiled then, as she would have if she had been beside me, and the river where I had left her was gone, and the thousand things I wanted to say to her had all been said. When the horn blew again, I was on my feet, the sickness magically gone, and my strength restored. I took a wedge of the bread out of the bag and ate. I opened the jar of water and drank. "Come on," I said. "We can't go up yet," Gagic said, but I was already at the door. I ran up the stairs to the deck. Before the mast of the cluster of small boats, through a pale haze of fog, the city of Constantinople rose in dense tiers of domes and minarets and spires. Ships of all shapes and sizes bobbed in the blue-green water of its harbor, and the highest, longest bridge I had ever seen spanned its waterway. At the height of the city stood a blind stone monolith that could only be a fortress or a palace or a cathedral. Gagic was standing beside me now, but neither of us said a word. There was nothing to say. Here was a city or a kingdom more impressive than any words we could use to describe it, and I could easily believe that the fountains of such a city were filled with gold, and that the lights of such a city could turn night into day. Anything would be possible in such a city. As we passed under the bridge, the realization that it was over, that I was safe at last, soared inside me, and at almost that exact moment I became aware that the ship had slowed, was stopping. In the middle distance between the ship and the brown line of the shore, I saw a small boat motoring toward us. I watched it casually at first, but as it drew closer, the tip of its bow pointed directly at us. I began to feel uneasy. There must have been 100 harmless purposes for such boats in these waters, but for some reason I feared the purpose of this one. I kept hoping it would veer off, but it came straight on until finally I could see the uniform of the sailor at the helm. Beside the sailor, incredibly, impossibly, was a gendarme. Seeing his scarlet collar, patches, and holstered gun, my new world vanished, and I was back in Sanus, running through a maze of streets to the sound of gunfire. But here there was nowhere to run. He had come for us, and we were caught. Helplessly, as though a current of electricity held me where I stood, I watched a rope ladder being dropped over the side of the ship, and a man who I guessed was the captain said, "That's for you two." I looked at him dumbfounded. "You paid to go to Constantinople," he said. "Well, this is Constantinople, and there's the ladder. Down you go." "Please," I said imploringly, hoping he might intercede on our behalf, but he had seen too many of our kind to worry about two more. We descended the ladder and stepped into the small boat. As the boat motored away, the gendarme asked to see our passports. "We don't have any passports," I said. "Do you have any money?" Gagic reached into his pocket and pulled out several coins, which the gendarme took. "Take off your shoes," he said. Gagic took off his shoes, and the gendarme removed a 5-lira note from one and handed the shoe back. "What about you?" he said. I gave him the 2 coins in my pocket. "That's all?" "That's all I have," I said. "Take off your shoes." I did so, and he looked inside one and then the other. The boat was approaching a dirt bank 15 yards from the bank, and the boat stopped. "Goodbye," the gendarme said. I did not understand. Did he mean get out? Or did he mean we were free? Or was this what he always said before he shot someone? I looked at Gagik, who seemed to be frozen with fear. Get into the water, the gendarme shouted. Gagik stood and quickly stepped out of the boat. Instinctively, absurdly, I began to roll up my trousers. Out, the gendarme said. I stepped into the cold, waist-high water, not knowing if I would be shot in the back. The boat began to motor away. I looked at Gagik, then at the dirt bank. There were no soldiers or gendarmes waiting to arrest us. There were no boats coming toward us. We seemed to be free. I exhaled for what seemed like the first time in 10 minutes and made a sound that was half laugh, half sigh. I turned to Gagik, who held out his trembling hands for me to see. I thought we were dead, he said. Look at my hands. Mother of Jesus, I thought we were dead. We started toward the bank, and when my foot touched it, I dropped to my knees and thanked God, and then picked up a handful of dirt, of freedom, and rubbed it on my arms and hands. I looked back at the sea, at the blue-green water and the cargo ship that the distance had made small. I looked at the horizon beyond the sea, at a world I would never see again.